Okay. All right, can everybody see and hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So thank you, Jim, for the invite to come and speak about my work in Africa tonight. It's really great to see a lot of old friends that I haven't seen in a long time on here. I was just thinking about today. It was about 20 years ago. I went to Berkeley to look at the collections to work on material for my El Salvador book, which was really my dissertation. That thing I worked on for like 4 or 5 years before that came out. So that was a big labor of love. And everybody was really gracious and helpful to me. So I thank you for that visit from 20 years ago, and it's a pleasure to be back tonight. So the title of the talk is about my work in Central Africa. I've been working in the Democratic Republic of Congo since 2007. I also took a trip to Burundi, partially overlapping with Dave Blackburn in 2011. And I've done a little bit of work in Uganda as well. But I thought tonight I would really focus on DRC. And if you're not familiar with this part of the world, there are actually two Congos. They're separated by the Congo River right here. So this is the Republic of Congo, which is a former French colony. And then there's the DRC, which is a former Belgian colony. And they have a very, very different history and unfortunately very divergent paths due to that colonial history. So I'm going to just, for a few minutes, just tell you a little bit about the country to kind of put my work in context. So Congo is large. It's more than 5 times the size of California. The current population is about 100 million people. The vast majority of those people are under the age of 24, so the population is growing very quickly. 63% in poverty. Very, very rich in resources. So they have tantalum, which is that rare earth metal that makes your cell phone vibrate, gold, diamonds, copper, timber, all kinds of resources. So really, the DRC, as I'm going to call it, it really should be the wealthiest country in Africa. But in reality, it is among the poorest and least developed countries in the world. This photograph shows a child laborer digging out some of these resources in these really awful and dangerous mines that operate all over DRC. So what happened? Well, I thought I would just take a few minutes just to go through the history to explain. So up until 1877, Central Africa was really this large blank place on the map of Africa. So this guy in the upper right, Henry Morton Stanley, who's famous for saying Dr. Livingstone, I presume, he took just under 1,000 days to explore the entire Congo River, and he lost 242 people on that expedition, but he took one of the first Maxim machine guns on that trip and killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Congolese because he tended to shoot first and ask questions later. When he would go into a village and need to feed his caravan if people weren't forthcoming with food, he got angry very quickly. So he was not a nice guy. And he tried to get the attention of several different countries to say, hey, this could be a really interesting colony. But the man on the lower right here, King Leopold II of Belgium, was the one who really took a keen interest in the Congo. So through sort of an evil genius PR campaign, he convinced the rest of the world that he should have control over this enormous territory because he said he wanted to bring religion and air quotes civilization to Africa, but really what he was after was money. And a lot of the European powers were, of course, very skeptical about giving him this much land, but he managed to convince the president of the United States at the time that his intentions were noble. And once the US signed on, all of the other European powers followed suit. So it was originally supposed to be for an organization that he was associated with, but through deception and confusion, it eventually just became his own personal property. So uh, over the course of just a couple of decades, they were getting ivory and then rubber by any means necessary, and they ended up killing about half of the native population of Congo during that time. It was one of the most brutal colonial regimes in history. So this eventually became a great embarrassment to the Belgian people, and they finally demanded to take over the territory after forgiving millions in loans to Leopold and actually paying him off to get control over it. So it became the Belgian Congo in 1908. And in the aftermath of World War I, they also got control of Rwanda and Burundi, these relatively smaller countries on the eastern edge of Congo. And they put in the same policies in Congo, in Rwanda and Burundi. Okay, and that was going to be important a few years later. So the Belgians did improve Congo's infrastructure. So they built up roads, bridges, hospitals, universities. They built up electricity access. In the 1950s, it would have been possible to get an ice cream in the middle of Congo, which I have often fantasized about when things got rough. And in the aftermath of colonialism going away, because in the 1950s, the winds of change came through Africa, all the old colonial powers kind of gave over control to native leaders. And that happened in 1960, but the Belgians did a really poor job of it. It was very violent. And for a few unstable years, it was really unsure where things were going to head. But then, with assistance from the USA and possibly the CIA and the Belgians, this guy in the lower right, Mobutu, took over in a coup in 1965. He became the dictator. He renamed the country Zaire, and he was in power for over 30 years. So the US and the Western world um, supported Mobutu with billions of dollars of aid that was supposed to go towards keeping up that infrastructure that the Belgians had built up. But instead, he stole a lot of it. Some of us may remember the Concorde. He actually rented Concorde planes to fly his pink champagne from Paris to this tiny little village in northern Congo where he grew up. That's how much money this guy wasted. And he also used some of that money to pay off his enemies to keep the peace. So nowadays, a lot of the Congolese that you speak to will look at him as a peacemaker. But he really stole a lot of that money while the country's infrastructure started to crumble and fall apart. So right around the time that Mobutu was starting to go downhill because of prostate cancer, those policies that the Belgians had put in place in Rwanda started to become a big problem. So it was the typical colonial divide and conquer routine where they put the Tutsi, who were a minority, in charge, and the Hutu really resented that. So it built up all this animosity for decades, even though before the Belgians had done that, they had gotten along just fine and actually intermarried for probably centuries. This all boiled over in 1994 with the Rwandan genocide. Somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people were killed in only about 100 days which was a pace that was actually quite a bit faster than the Holocaust. Um, and eventually, some Tutsi who had been in exile in neighboring Uganda and working for the military, they came in to Rwanda to kick these guys out. And where did they go? Congo. So once they were there, they started stirring up the same ethnic tensions that they had been doing in Rwanda. And this led to a whole bunch of unrest. This guy, Laurent Kabila, who is shown in the lower right-hand photograph, was backed by Uganda and Rwanda. And he marched all the way from Eastern Congo to Western Congo to get rid of any remnant of Mobutu's government. He took over as president and he changed the name of the country back to Democratic Republic of Congo. But that relationship didn't last very long. And just a year later, he was getting rid of the Rwandans, fighting the Ugandans, and then all of a sudden it became this huge conflict that many of you may not have heard of because the Western media didn't cover it. And between 1998 and 2003, it was called Africa's World War. Roughly 5 million people died in that conflict. It was the bloodiest conflict since World War II. So that leads to the present day, and a lot of the consequences of colonialism are still creating problems in Congo today. And I thought now I would just take a minute to talk about why it's so difficult to work in Congo and have a field program. So this is a bridge over the crocodile-infested Ituri River that was probably built in the colonial era. And as you can see, at some point it collapsed. And the Congolese solution to get around these infrastructure problems is often quite clever, but it's also dangerous, expensive, and chaotic. So the way you get around this bridge is you drive your truck up onto one of these rickety wooden barges that are made with wood from the forest that you can see in the background. And they kind of pull you over the river, and you hope you don't bump into another one of these little structures and your truck sinks. So nobody's in charge. There are plenty of people with automatic weapons that are yelling and screaming at each other. You also hope you don't get caught in the middle of a gunfight during that process. And then other issues with infrastructure, as far as just getting around, the roads are in terrible shape. So believe it or not, this is a national highway in the Katanga region in southeastern Congo. So it's really difficult because when you're just trying to move from place to place, you often don't know if that puddle in front of you is 2 inches or 2 feet deep. And in the northeastern part of Congo in Ituri, that trip that I took in 2014 was by far the most difficult because of the road conditions. Every single day getting stuck in the mud or having to navigate huge muddy pits. It was just really brutal. But there's also the challenge of navigating when you are away from the infrastructure. So when you are climbing in the mountains, it's like, of course, being on a stair climber for 12 hours. I'm sure many of you who have done field work in montane areas are saying, okay, I've been there, done that. But it's really, really difficult when the rains make those paths in the forest really muddy and slippery, and it's really very challenging to just get around to get to the field sites. And then, of course, there are venomous snakes. As a herpetologist, you're looking for those. But unlike other areas of the world, even in other parts of Africa, the hospitals in Congo are in really, really poor shape. Outside of major cities, there's no electricity. Even in major cities, that electricity can be sporadic. So it's really impossible to keep any kind of antivenom. And if you get bit by a venomous snake, or as one of my colleagues did, sprayed in the eye from a black-necked spitting cobra, you're on your own. So we really have to be careful when dealing with hot snakes. All right, and then there are a few tropical diseases you have to worry about. And I think probably Congo is the worst place in the world for this because of the long history of coevolution between humans and our closest relatives, including chimpanzees and bonobos and two species of gorillas. So I put together this map in 2015 for another talk, and I kind of resurrected it for this one to kind of remind myself. The white circles are the localities where I've worked up until 2015, and then the red areas are where there have been Ebola outbreaks. Just last year, there was another one here in Mbandaka, which I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes. And then between 2018 and 2020, there was a really large outbreak in this area of northeastern Congo. And in fact, just last week, a woman died from Ebola. So they're not quite sure if this is flared up again or if it's sort of the leftovers from that. Luckily, in February of 2020, I enrolled in an NIH study to get the Ebola vaccine. So hopefully that will be effective in case I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time in the future. But this is a concern. But really, for me, the scariest one is African sleeping sickness. So this is a parasite that invades the central nervous system. It causes extreme fatigue, as you can see in this person suffering from it in this historical photo. Eventually, you experience mental deterioration, you kind of go crazy, and then it can lead to death. So in some areas of the lowland rivers where you pass through, there are tsetse flies, and it's always really scary because you're not sure if they are carriers of this disease. In this particular case, from this example on the Busira River back in 2013, turns out that this particular species of tsetse fly does not transmit African sleeping sickness to humans. They only are involved with animals. But still, with tsetse flies, you really don't get bit by tsetse flies, you get stabbed by them because they have really big mouth parts and very, very painful bites. And they're really quick, so you can't just swat them away. All right, so knowing all that, why would anybody, want to work in this part of the world? Well, I think I can convince all of you as herpetologists that it's really like walking on the moon because it's such an enormous area that is very, very poorly explored. I would argue that it's the most poorly explored terrestrial region in the world. And let me just give you some information about why this is such an exciting place. So you can see from this NOAA graphic here that there's this big bowl-shaped depression. The yellow areas are montane areas that kind of surround it. So of course, the major feature of it is the Congo River. This is the deepest river in the world and the second longest river in Africa. So it's absolutely enormous. It spans 6 countries, 3 million square kilometers of tropical forest, and 6 major ecoregions, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. So just to sort of underscore how poorly explored this place is, this is the Okapi. And I always like to ask my students, what do you think this thing is related to? And a lot of them will guess zebras because of the stripes on the hindquarters there, but it's, of course, closely related to giraffes. This thing is the size of a horse, and it wasn't described until 1901. And then there's the bonobo, which we now recognize as a separate species that is sister to chimpanzees. They only occur east and south of the Congo River, whereas the chimps are everywhere else in Africa on the other side of the river. And one of the interesting things about bonobos is that when you think about chimpanzees, they're very, very violent. So whenever they have any kind of conflict, they will fight each other. They will even kill each other. But bonobos, let's just say they have a more peaceful way of solving their conflicts. So a lot of people have kind of called them the hippie ape. I think that's an apt term. And then there's the Congo peacock, 1936. So this thing is between the size of a chicken and a turkey. How do you miss that? But a lot of my students will say, okay, but that was a really long time ago. What have you done for me lately? And I always give them this example. Back in 2008, they found 125,000 Western lowland gorillas in a swamp forest in Northern Republic of Congo that nobody knew was there. How do you miss an army of gorillas? So this kind of boggles my mind and fuels the imagination about what else is out there. But of course, when it comes to herps, which are much smaller than this, we have missed an incredible amount of diversity. So what I'm going to talk about today is my trip to Western Congo in 2013, which was really, of course, because of the area of the country where it was focused on the lowland rainforests. And here's the other reason why it's so exciting. So these two guys, Raymond Laurent and Gaston Francois de Witte, are responsible for most of what we know about Congolese herpetology. So they collected in Congo for decades. They published for decades, both of them very prolific, especially Laurent. But most of their work was centered on big national parks in montane areas of Eastern Congo. So think Virunga National Park, Upemba National Park. So very little work in strictly lowland rainforest Congo Basin. Plus, many of their descriptions were a bit wanting. Raymond Laurent, for example, described, I think, 7 or 8 different subspecies of Hyperolius lateralis, some of which differed supposedly by eye color. So it's going to take a long time to untangle that mess. Here's the other thing. Because of that colonial history I was telling you about, you can see that up until about 1960, the number of new descriptions of amphibians that were occurring at that time were not that different between the neotropics and Africa. But then after colonialism ended and everybody had to leave the country and very, very few Westerners were going in to work there, especially once things got really bad in the 90s, you have this huge divergence between the African and neotropical realms as a whole, because this pattern, did hold for other areas of Africa as well. So the other thing that kind of intrigued me as I was starting to think about putting together a research program in Congo is this map from the Global Amphibian Assessment, where you can kind of see this little donut hole of diversity in the lowland parts of DRC. So you can see that there's actually a lot of diversity surrounding DRC, but I just thought, is that really true? Or is it because there's been a lack of recent work, not only during the colonial era, but because of the post-colonial era and not too many people being able to go in there. So there's this famous mammologist, Jonathan Kingdon, who has called the Congo Basin a bit of an evolutionary whirlpool. And I think his point was, we really don't know what's going on, but it's kind of spinning out these endemics at the edges of the basin, at least for mammals. So a lot to learn about this area of the world, which is why it's so exciting to work there. So as I started to increase my collections in the country, it was possible to start doing some big picture phylogenies. This is the genus Boedon that I worked on in 2015. And there is really just one species, Boedon olivaceus, that really likes forests. And so I was surprised when I combined my samples from the Congo Basin and the Albertine Rift, which is the mountainous area right on the eastern border of DRC, and found that they were not monophyletic. And when I mapped them out, it became clear, okay, there's one really widespread species in the lowlands of Central Africa, and another one as you transition into the Albertine Rift. So is the lowland Congo Basin really that interesting for speciation and endemism? I wasn't quite sure. But then I started looking at some of the other studies that were coming out in the early 2010s. And by the way, here is a map showing those 6 ecoregions I was talking about in the Congo Basin. So there was a study by Mo Riddell's lab on Sclerofrees superciliaris group, where they described this thing chanting eye from eastern Congo. There was a paper about Hyperolias, dwarf crocodiles, these really pretty red-sided skinks. And the overarching theme was actually, yeah, there is some endemism and speciation going on within the Congo Basin lowlands. But for a lot of these studies, the sampling wasn't that great. So for some of them, there'd be, some samples maybe from Cameroon, maybe from Gabon, and then far eastern Congo with not too much in between. So that really excited me, and I thought, okay, if I can get into some of these really poorly sampled ecoregions here, especially ones on both sides of major rivers, including the Congo, but others as well, maybe we can finally start to understand the bigger picture of what's going on with speciation patterns and river barriers. So here's a map of my 2013 expedition. Flew into Kinshasa, drove to this place right here called Bumbo-Lemene Reserve, which I'll show you in just a moment. Drove back to Kinshasa, and then basically got in a dugout canoe, and with only a few exceptions here and there, went on a river journey. All the way to Mbandaka, and then east to the northwestern corner of Salonga National Park, and then back. So it's kind of hard to estimate how many kilometers total we went, because the Congo is pretty straight, but some of these other smaller rivers I'm going to show you were kind of corkscrewy. So I estimate it was about 1,500 kilometers total over about 10 weeks. So Bumbo-Lemene Reserve is shown here on the map. So here's Kinshasa, here's the reserve, and most of it is this woodland savanna mosaic as shown here. But it's named for the Bombo and Lumene rivers, and there's gallery forest along those rivers. So this was a really interesting place to start the expedition, because we kind of got the best of both worlds. We found some savanna endemic species and some things endemic to the forest. So last year, Louise Serracao and Aaron Bauer and colleagues were working on a paper about Hemidactylus of Angola, and I had sent a few specimens to Aaron, and they threw in one of my samples from Bumbo-Lemene shown here, and it was pretty clear it was a new species. So this year, we went ahead and wrote up that description, and I'm hoping to get the final acceptance from Journal Herpetology very soon. So look for that later this year. On that same trip, we also found Xenopus Melotropicalis, which was described by Ben Evans and colleagues in 2015. And then, can everybody hear the call? I thought it would be cool to kind of embed an audio file as I talk about some of the frogs I've recorded. So hopefully you can all hear that. But this is Hyperoliasinasicus, which was a real surprise when I worked on the phylogenetics of this thing, because that species was described from 2,000 meters elevation in the Marungu Plateau, which is in far southeastern DRC. So we were not expecting it to occur that far to the west and in the lowlands. This seems to be a new species of Leptopelis related to the Notatus group, which is more commonly known in Cameroon in far western Central Africa. So I'm just going to kind of go through the different areas that we visited and just kind of show you some cool herps and some stories as we went along. So after that, we got back to Kinshasa. We got a boat and we started heading north, and it was really incredible traveling along the Congo River, because you see these wrecks of these old colonial era ships that at some point sprang a leak or just became too old to be useful anymore, and they just kind of pushed them ashore, and they've just been rotting there for maybe decades or even centuries.
Hey, Eli, the slides may not be advancing. We still are looking at the slide with the phylogeny with Hemidactylus and the Xenopus Melotropicalis.
Okay, let me try to stop sharing and share again. Here we go. Can you see it now? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So here's the old wreck of a ship I was talking about. Xenopus Melotropicalis. The type locality is Kinshasa, so that turned up on the Congo River. And then you have all of these little fishing villages along the eastern banks. And so every once in a while you can stop and talk to the fishermen and say, hey, did you catch anything in your nets? And every once in a while a turtle will pop up. There we go. So here's an example, Pelusios carinatus. And then we headed up to this place called Chumbiri, which is right on the Congo River, and from there had to hop on motorcycles to go east. We were told about this place where the Belgians were doing research on bonobos and were actually trying to habituate them for tourists. And they said the forest is really good, so we thought, okay, let's go check that out. And one of my Congolese colleagues, Aristote, said, hey, I have this magic ski mask. It's going to give us all this luck, so I'm going to put it on, and I bet you we're going to find a bunch of really cool stuff. And he was right. So this is where we found Cardioglossa Congolia, which was described, I believe, in 2015. A new species of Phylothamnus. We found Leptopelis oscillatus schutzi. I'm going to talk about shoots again in just a minute. Calabaria, which was really cool. And this tiny, tiny little Arthroleptis. It's about the size of your pinky fingernail. And I'm hoping to work with Dave at some point in the future to work on this and other arthroleptids that we've come across. All right, so from there, I believe it was the Ruki River that we took, and we entered into the southern end of Lake Mai-Ndombe, headed north through it, and then on the eastern shore, we found some friendly villagers and thought, okay, let's set up shop here. It was a really interesting place. Mai-Ndombe means a dark water. There's something going on with the acidity of the water that makes it really unique. And it's surrounded by this seasonally flooded forest. So in some areas that were a little bit higher, it was dry like this, but in the lowlands, they were still flooded. So it was really good for amphibians and all kinds of herps. And we befriended the local Twa pygmies here and in many other places on this trip, and they were great because they know the forest really, really well. They know where these animals can be found. So they were great guides and even brought in stuff. So it was really, really incredible. It was a privilege to work with them. So this is a new species of Phrynobatrachus that's in the Oritis group. This is a cool little Hemidactylus. This is a juvenile Greya ornata. I have a new student, Teslin Cheney, who's going to be working on Greya for her master's thesis. There's some really interesting things going on with that group. And this is also where we started to see a lot of dwarf crocodiles, but not in a good way. So people will kind of grab these things out of the forest. They will sort of hog tie them like this, so that the mouth is tied shut and the tail is tied to that, so that you can kind of carry them around almost like a purse, and they eat them. So you see these in Kinshasa, you see them absolutely everywhere, even though they're classified as an endangered species. People are eating them for food all over the place. And then we came across this really cool water cobra. And it was clear right away that this was different from Naja annulata, which is the really common and widespread water cobra in other areas of the Congo. You can see that it has a difference in coloration. It's actually quite a bit smaller. But then when I got back to the United States and sent some samples to a colleague because he was working on a project with these, he said, oh, they're genetically identical. Well, last year, a couple of people described this thing from Mayan-Dombe as a new species, and the morphology really is very different. They're significantly different in size. They have all kinds of scale counts that do not overlap with annulata. So, but they didn't have any molecular data in their paper. So this is going to be a really interesting story when this is all figured out. All right, so then we worked a little bit on the northwestern side of Mayan-Dombe, and then we grabbed a truck to go overland to Lake Tumba. And we found another really friendly Twa Pygmy village near Lake Tumba. So we just kind of set up shop there for a week. Here I am looking a little rougher wear with Aristote and the chief of the village. And again, it was like gangbusters for herps at this place. So this is Holaspis, which can glide. And I believe that this is a new species. Conyxes erosa. This is a juvenile. The adults don't look quite as serrated, but it's probably because at a larger size, there's only not too many things that can eat you. I believe this might be a new species of Mahalia. And here is a new Leptopelis. Let me listen to the call for a second.
We can't hear it. Or at least I can't.
Can't hear it? Okay. I tried. It sounds like a Leptopelis.
We don't see it either.
Maybe you could do an imitation.
Let me try again. Okay. Can you see the map and the bamboo forest now? Okay. So the next place was Watsi Kengo. So after leaving Lake Tumba, we drove to Umandaka, and then we got in another boat and went really, really far. So it was 270 kilometers in a straight line distance, much further, of course, when you factor in all the bends in the river. And I was retracing the steps of Arne Schutz, who had collected in this area in the mid 2000s when he was around age 72, 73, which I think is really impressive. So we ended up in this place, Huachikengo, sort of at the crossroads of this little road and the Salonga River. And again, found really helpful people to help us look for herps. It's locking up on me again. Here we go. I don't know if you can hear that one. This might be either the long lost Hyperolius sancuruensis, which is only known from the type locality in a completely different part of Congo, or something completely new.
It's very quiet. I could hear it a little bit, but we can't see an image.
Oh, the image isn't working again?
I think that each time there's an issue, it's when you have one of the recordings.
Ah, okay. Well, that's unfortunate, but can you see the frog and Naja now? Okay, so one of the really great finds we had in Huachikengo was Naja multifasciata, which I've only found one of these in all my time in Congo. So that was an incredible find. This is a new species of Phrynobatrachus. And here is a little juvenile Nile monitor. So then we continued on. You can really see the corkscrew nature of the river as we went into Salonga National Park. There was a little ranger outpost there, and they helped us for about a week to get established and set up drift fences with pitfall traps. So here's an aubria, which is a pyxicephalid that I haven't seen in too many other places. Probably a new species of Hyperolius. Working with Rafe Brown and his PhD student Katie Allen on Toxicodryas. This is a cryptic new species that's sister to Toxicodryas pulverulenta. And there's another one in the blanding eye group that, among diagnostic features, has differences in venom toxicity, which is pretty cool. And this is a possible new species in the genus Polemon. So you do come across Polemon regularly at night. They're kind of slow moving things, often with these bright collars. So this one's pretty dull, but they range from bright orange to yellow, and you only find them at night. Now, as we were leaving Salonga, and we were kind of going around these bends in the river, it was really early in the morning. The sun had just come out, and the really incredible thing as we were leaving was all these Mecistops that had been basking up on the banks, warming themselves up, and they would be spooked by our outboard motor as we were coming around the bends. But it was just incredible to see them just take these running leaps off of the beach into the water. It really made me feel like I was taking a passage through the Cretaceous. And that is something I will never forget. All right, so I wanted to talk about one other group, the toads, because as some of you know, I've been working on Congo Basin toads for a really long time. And this is a mitochondrial tree. Please excuse the old Amiophrinus labels, because this has been updated, but it took me a really long time to put this together. So toads were found in all of those places that I just went through. And in many of those places, there was a toad that was in the forest there and nowhere else. So really incredible diversity for toads. So this is just showing you that Scleraphes, the genus now, is monophyletic. There's non-forest species at the base of the clade, which makes sense knowing how they dispersed out of South America tens of millions of years ago and then came down north into Africa. But the really incredible thing is that there are at least 17 lineages of Congo Basin toads. And if we kind of focus on this part of the tree and blow it up, you don't have to be an expert on toad morphology to be able to look at these photographs and see that, yeah, there's a lot of diversity here. So right now, there's only about 4 or 5 species that are recognized from the Congo Basin. So I've got a lot of work to do here. But you can see there's really significant differences in the parotid glands. I know this isn't really scaled for size, but this one, Scleraphes petiti, is really tiny compared to the others. There's differences in color pattern. This thing has this flaming orange lip. So there's just an insane amount of toad diversity. And the reason why I haven't wrapped up this project yet is because every time either I or my Congolese colleagues go into the field, they find another one. And it's like, oh, well, we have to include that. So it's been really hard for me to say no to keep adding in more specimens and more data into this monster project. And just to show you really quick, a couple interesting things about their distribution. So one of these species, Cameroonensis, is all over the place. So it's in every ecoregion, it crosses rivers. This seems to be the tank of the Central African toad world. But if we kind of think about those color-coded clades I showed you before and where they occur, a lot of them only occur in one ecoregion. Very few of them cross rivers. And then there seems to be a whole bunch of unique toad diversity sandwiched between the Shuapa and Salonga rivers. So this again kind of makes me wonder, how many other toad species are sandwiched between these other rivers that haven't been sampled yet. Probably a lot. So one of the other cool things about being a professor, as I'm sure many of you know, is that you can share your research with your students. So I teach a genetics course, and I just went through the spiel that I gave you with them. And one of my students looked at this image and came up to me at the end of class and said, this toad kind of reminds me of one of my gabbies. And I said, okay, what's a gabby? And she said, oh, that's my pet gaboon viper. So apparently her thing is to keep really dangerous venomous snakes at home. So I said, wow, that's really interesting. I'm not really sure, but let me go ahead and get a bunch of specimens on loan and let's do some comparisons and see if there's anything there. And of course there was. We did a lot of different comparisons, went through the mimicry literature and realized, yeah, there is a lot of suspicious similarity here. And then I was talking about this to my colleague, Hemidactylus, and he said, when I catch the large Scleraphes chanting eye toads in the wild, they hiss. So that was it. We went on and put the whole argument together, and this was published in 2019. So thank you for letting me share a little bit of my herpetological fieldwork with you today. If anyone's interested in seeing more, please check out my website. I'd like to thank Frank Portillo, my former PhD student, for generating a lot of the data that you looked at today, including many undergrads, funding from NSF, National Geographic. I'd like to say a special thank you to Carol Spencer for processing the many loan requests and tissue requests that my lab has made to the MVZ over the years. And especially my Congolese colleagues, Shifendera Kasamba, Mwenebatu Aristo, Wandege Maninga. We've been working together since 2007. None of this work would be possible without them. And of course, CRSN and ICCN, these are the Congolese societies that are responsible for allowing us to conduct our research and for permits. So with that, I thought I would leave you with a moment of Zen. This is a video made by Wandege of some cool butterflies somewhere in the middle of the Congo Basin. So thank you.
Now might be a good time for people to unmute and clap.
Yay.
And if folks have questions, I'm sure you do.
Great talk, Eli.
Yeah, that was awesome. You still have Eli?
Still here. Just gave you a thumbs up.
I have a whole bunch of questions, but I'm going to let other people ask questions first. I guess we can do questions through the chat if people prefer to do it that way. If people don't want to verbally ask them, or just say I have a question, or.
I see that Raina says she misses the field. Putting this together really makes me miss the field, but also makes me realize, how lucky I've been to be able to work there up to this point. So.
I have a question, maybe it's Jim's question too, about this Holaspis that glides, you said. Can you expand on that? That just seems very interesting to me.
Yeah, so I believe there's a paper out there comparing some of the morphological adaptations of Holaspis to flying geckos. So they have, you could probably see they had a really dorsal ventrally flattened body. They have little fringes of skin on their limbs and their toes and their tail. So the idea is if they're climbing around on a tree and something tries to eat them, they just jump off and glide down to another tree or to the ground and run away. So they're really hard to catch. I haven't found many of them. There's really not enough sampling yet to do anything meaningful just yet. But all of the samples that I do have from far western DRC, northeastern Congo, and then there's a single sample from the Atomwe Plateau at about 2,000 meters in the Albertine Rift. They're all very genetically different from each other. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Did you see any? So there's also, I think in the Congo, there are the scaly tail glider squirrels. Are those in the same area? Just seems interesting that there's this cool coevolution in these environments.
Yeah, I haven't been able to see too many squirrels because for security reasons, we often have to work pretty close to villages because security is a really, really big concern everywhere in Congo. And whenever you're really close to a village, there's usually not that many wild mammals that you'll see. Although I have seen squirrels once or twice, but never the scaly ones that you're talking about. I have seen pangolins regularly, and I think they're probably poaching them. I think that's one of the most poached animals in the world for the Asian medicine trade. But unfortunately, in Congo, I haven't really seen too many mammals to speak of. But in Uganda, it was a different story because you go to the national parks in Uganda and it's all about law enforcement. So if you have a protected area with really good law enforcement and the poaching is really limited, then you'll see a lot more. And I saw a lot of elephants in Uganda, a lot of hippos, a lot more wildlife than I ever saw in Congo.
I got a question, Eli.
Was wondering about the crocs that you were showing. Is it mesistops that were running off the beach when you were
Yes.
going up the river? Is that the same one that they were eating for food?
No, that was Osteolaemus.
Okay. And is that like the most common sort of reptile taken for food out there that you saw?
From what I saw, yes. But when you go to the restaurants in Kinshasa, they have cycloderma, that soft shell thing, and you will often see people selling turtles in open air markets. So turtles are also popular in the bushmeat trade. There's this guy who I follow on Twitter. I think his name is Adams Kasinga, who tweets out a lot about animal welfare around the area of Kinshasa. So he does a lot of stuff about chimpanzees and bonobos, but he also occasionally will show bushmeat markets. And the other day, he had a huge python that had been taken to a bushmeat market in Kinshasa. So, if it has meat, they'll probably eat it.
Cool, thank you.
Can I ask a question, Eli?
Of course.
The first of my 5 or 6 questions. I won't ask them all sequentially. I'm just curious if you have an issue in Africa with turtles being harvested and sent off to China for food consumption, if turtles are becoming rare there, like they are in other parts of the world, or if that market reach extends all the way to Central Africa.
I'm not really sure, because I think the logistics of getting those heavy turtles to China from Congo would be challenging. The only thing I can say about that is there is an increasing Chinese footprint in Congo, and that has been a mixed blessing. So in some areas of the east where the roads are just absolutely horrible, as I showed you in those photographs, they're coming in and they're improving the roads, but they want something in return, right? They want access to those resources. So I have seen more Chinese working in different areas of Congo. And the PBS NewsHour, I think it was just like a month ago, had a great story deforestation in the area where I was in Western Congo. And apparently there are some big Chinese companies that are having a hand in that. So I never noticed a big influence of, huge numbers of turtles being harvested for Asian markets. I suppose that if they could get them onto a ship, that they could be shipped over there. I think it would be harder to do it with FedEx or DHL or something like that. I'm not sure how it is in Asia. Maybe you can tell me. But I think logistically, it would be kind of hard to get large numbers of turtles out of Congo all the way to that part of the world.
I think they use shipping containers.
Okay, yeah. So if they put a bunch of turtles in shipping containers, then I suppose it would be possible. But again, they'd have to spend a fair bit of money, because from Kinshasa they would have to truck it down to the coast, because the Congo River is not navigable. Southwest of Kinshasa, there's a series of rapids there. So you have to get in a truck it down to the coast, and then get it in the shipping container, I guess, or just transfer it from the truck to the ship. So I suppose it's possible. It just seems like it'd be really expensive. But if it's happening, I know nothing about it.
I suspect they get a lot of money for them, because it's not easy to take your turtles from Sulawesi to China either, right? It's not like taking them from Central Africa, but they're doing it and basically wiping out the turtle fauna.
So is anybody trying to identify the species of turtles that are showing up in Asian markets? Are they coming up with African species there?
God, is Tim still on the line? I mean, I imagine Tim probably knows this.
I don't see him. I think he left. I'll talk to him about it
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Okay.
Does anybody else have another question for Eli, or should I ask another one? I have 3 more. I'll ask a question. So your cobra study. So you were saying that, these cobras are morphologically distinct, but the initial analysis suggested that they were genetically identical. Was that just mitochondrial data?
So yes, that was mitochondrial data. That was not done in my lab. And the person who did that is no longer working on it. So somebody else has kind of taken up that project, and they're using larger data sets. So it will be really interesting to see what the final story is with that. But of course, there could be some interesting hybridization going on. There could be
Introgression seems
yeah,
like
there could be really strong selection because of the really different nature of Mai-Ndombe compared to the other rivers in Central Africa. But it's going to be an interesting story when it's all figured out.
I had a couple really silly questions, kind of easy questions. The one was, when you were going along that 1,500-mile journey on the river, are there people all along the way, or is this completely remote? I mean, there were.
So once we got east of Mbandaka, there were fishing villages the further east you got from Mbandaka, but the further east you went, the sparser they became. And, there were long stretches of many hours or even a day at a time where we didn't see a village at all. And that was kind of nice. I think that was the most relaxing expedition I've been on. It was really quite nice to just go for many hours and just look at the fishing eagles and all the different birds. There was one area where there were hundreds of butterflies just kind of swooping down and drinking from the river, and just have some really nice video footage of that. It was beautiful. Definitely the most pristine place I've ever been.
So it was pristine habitat there. I mean, I don't know anything about the history of logging in Congo, whether a lot of it's been logged at some stage, or whether there are vast areas where people have been afraid to go, and so there's still great forest.
Yeah, so there was a paper that came out in 2007 in Nature that talked about logging in Central Africa. And of course, it is a problem like other tropical areas. The thing with logistics, though, is that forests that are close to the Congo River, those have been hit pretty hard, because all you need to do is chop down the tree and then drag it to the river, and then you can get it on a barge or something to take it down to Kinshasa. But in the more remote areas, how do you get the trees out of there? That's the problem. The roads are terrible. In that area of Western Congo, there are still many remote areas. And I was just looking at a paper just the other day from Plus One from 2016, where somebody was sort of using ecological modeling to try to figure out how many pygmies are in Central Africa. And they estimated that it's over 900,000. And many of these smaller tribes are probably still uncontacted. So there still are really large areas of DRC that have not been logged and would be probably impossible to log unless they built really big roads.
One more question for you.
Sure.
How many species?
If no one else will ask, then you can, right?
10 weeks of field work. How many species of herps would you see on a 10-week expedition to Congo?
Oh gosh. I remember counting them up at the end of that 2013 expedition and being really impressed. It was in the hundreds. But I can't recall off the top of my head what that number was. It was a long time ago.
Cool. Other questions, anyone? All right, well, let's thank Eli for a spectacular talk. I really appreciated that, enjoyed that talk a lot.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Eli.
Awesome, Eli. Bye, everybody.